Okay,
no, you're going back into it.
This is what my family does. We're starting. And we're starting with this. Okay. This is a family thing. You do something once in my family, and that is a part of your
identity.
Character. Yes, your identity, your core identity for the rest of your life, and you cannot shake it. So
that's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, I just want you to know that.
And I'm
if
the
you
person.
do something once, you are forever that person.
Wow.
It's actually so obnoxious.
Yeah.
It makes me nuts. It makes me so nuts. I'm like, I literally did that one time when I was 16, guys. Like, I am 34.
So you can't make mistakes. Yeah.
No.
Even small things.
No.
Wow. That's a lot.
I remember my older sister, she got out of doing the dishes a lot because one time she broke a dish while putting dishes in the dishwasher. Oh, and I was like, well, that was brilliant.
Yeah.
I'm going to smash dishes and then I won't have to do the dishes.
Listen, this is not exactly the same thing, but it made me think of it. Because I got banished from the kitchen. What? I couldn't help in the kitchen or with cooking. It was my mom's domain because of this one time. And she might tell this story different if she was here, but how I remember it is there was this one time I was in the kitchen in the way, I'm sure. I was probably 12 maybe. And I was wanting to help, but I was just kind of eating the food. And I remember,
oh my gosh, I would be murdered.
And I remember I was eating a carrot. Just a raw carrot, and I had it completely chewed up in my mouth, and then I felt a sneeze coming on. Okay? And the worst thing is getting chunks of carrot up in your sinuses if you were to try to implode
I've
that
actually
sneeze.
had that happen.
It's
I don't know
horrid.
How.
It's horrid. And I was I'd made a decision that I couldn't do that. I couldn't do that with this mouthful of carrot chewed up in my mouth. And so I just I was some kind of a machine gun. I just sprayed the whole kitchen with chewed up carrot chunks. And my mom was just get out. Get out of here. And I was just I was saving my sinuses. But I was kind of banished from the kitchen.
I made an educated,
I weighed the pros and cons.
This scenario, and this was the only option.
This is the only option for me. But I was kind of banished from the kitchen. But I do feel it created a story that I think was too oblivious or not, I don't know, to be helpful in the kitchen. Yeah. I also missed a flight once. Mm-hmm. And then I was forever,
always the person.
Always
you're never gonna. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I missed the flight. I also walked out of the secure area with nothing on me. And I was just
oh my gosh.
And I was 20. This is right when I had gotten married to Luke. And I didn't have his phone number memorized.
Oh my gosh.
So who did I have to call? My mom.
Oh my gosh.
And my mom yelled at Luke. Yeah. So that anyways.
It's interesting because getting yelled at for things like that, where you already feel stupid, embarrassed, bad, it's kind of the worst. A lot of times the gut reaction of a parent, because I experienced this myself, or a parent or another person is to yell at them. And I remember a distinct lesson actually from my first, I had a relationship that was 7 years. We got married, and his mom, I remember her telling me this story. She was actually a really good lesson teller because she would always tell it about herself, but it was really her trying to impart some wisdom on you.
Okay.
And she told me this story that really stuck with me about how when someone has an accident or messes up, or she was just in that moment, they know they fucked up. So there's no point in being you fucked up.
Right.
Just helping them and being there for them. But when I fucked up, my parents let me know, you fucked up. You know what I mean? There was never I'm sure you feel really bad about what happened. Yeah. And approaching it from that standpoint.
It's such a good point.
Yeah. And it's just something I've never forgotten and tried to integrate into my life.
Yeah.
Because when somebody gets in a car accident or
they're traumatized.
Yeah. Or messes something up in the house, drops something and I don't know, shatters a plate where the food goes everywhere and ruins a dish. It's they did not want that to happen.
Right.
And there's literally no point in just berating them for it. But that was what was my experience. And so that was my default thing.
Sure.
If somebody fucked up like that, I'd be what the fuck is wrong with you?
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Well, that would be, that was modeled after you. I mean, I think that's something with my girls that they almost were especially my Evie, she would be like, that was an accident. She would like refuse almost to be like,
to feel bad.
Yeah. She was like, that was an accident. I didn't mean for that to happen. And she could be kind of stubborn like that. And I love her for it. But there is like a huge distinction around intent. Like if the intent was like, you're being a little shit, there needs to be a conversation there. But if the intent was like, that was genuinely an accident,
right.
like, actually, just before I came here, Evie had the garbage disposal on and she was like rinsing out her lunchbox, and her little travel spoon went into the garbage disposal and it made like the most horrific sound.
The worst.
And I come running out of my room because like I was afraid that she was getting hurt. I just like heard the sound and my first instinct was like somehow she put her hand down the garbage disposal or something. I didn't know what was happening, but I was on like full mama bear mode. And I was like, oh my God, what? And then Evie was freaking out. I was like, shut it up. And she burst into tears and she was so upset. And I was just like, because it was like so loud and so scary. And I got upset because I thought she was getting hurt. But it was like this whole moment where we like, and Lila's crying. We're all crying. All of us are crying because of the spoon in the garbage disposal. It scared us all. I think it scared all of us. And then we like, after like I get the spoon out and we're like, it's okay. And we're all like holding each other. We're like, it's okay. That was scary. It was an accident. It's okay. And we like talked about, I was like, Evie, what are some things that maybe in the future, this is what I did. I was like, in the future, how could we prevent something like that from happening again? And she's like, maybe I need to just make sure I don't have like the small things that could easily fall down. I don't have those in the sink when I put the garbage disposal on. I'm like, that's a great idea. And that's like how we handled it. But it was just like, yeah, I like can't imagine yelling at her about that,
I don't know that I would have been yelled at. Well, maybe.
Maybe.
I'm like, would I have been yelled at in that situation?
I feel like
possibly, actually,
it like fucked up the spoon. I had to throw that out. I was actually afraid.
But the thing is it's like the yelling growing up was more of just like a default. So I don't know what the reaction would be. But it took leaving my household and going out into the real world to be like, there are some things that I learned that I do not have to choose to do it this way. Yeah. And that's been like, that was literally my early 20s, I feel like, was that.
Differentiating.
Yeah just like, exactly what it is. People don't do things how I was raised, and I can do it differently. And that's really important. Yeah. And honestly, I think that's been really important for me in wanting to like have kids, because I want to do things differently. Not that my childhood was bad, by the way. It's just like, I don't know. There's things that you see that you're like, I don't want to do it that way.
That didn't work for me.
That just like did not work for me.
Yeah. I think the biggest overarching thing, if I could put my finger on it, is I didn't feel like I was parented to me as an individual. I was like, it was corporate parenting. Yeah. Because I mean,
I think that's a generational thing.
Yeah. And also I had like 3 siblings. My sisters are a year older and a year younger than me. So we were just this unit. And I rarely felt seen for me. And even though I know my parents efforted to try to give us like individuality, but that's like one thing I really want to parent my girls for them. Like how they receive comfort and love is different. How it actually, if there is any correction or discipline, it's different for both of them. Like it looks differently because they receive it differently. But it takes effort to like learn about them and like what works and what doesn't work.
I feel like we were all parented so differently, like worlds apart. But that was actually extremely frustrating as a kid.
Well, see, I feel that way about my younger brother. He was parented very differently than I was. Is that what you mean?
I don't know. I just know that we were parented so differently and there was no real explanation as to why. And it's something that like me and my siblings continue to talk about. We're just like, we were all treated so differently.
Oh, that's interesting. See, I feel like I was treated the same as like my
we were
siblings.
Treated very, very differently. And I still don't fully understand why.
That's interesting.
It's still like a little confusing. There are moments where we're like, maybe that's why we're all treated so differently. But the thing that is like really interesting that's come out of it is when I talk to my adult siblings, it's just how different our experiences were.
Right.
Like when I hear them talk about it, I'm like, did we grow up in the same house? especially me, because I think that's also an important thing to keep in mind hearing me talk about my childhood is I think I was exceptionally like sensitive to a lot of things that maybe my siblings weren't. Actually, no, they're all sensitive in their own ways, really. You know what I mean? Like their sensitivities are two different things.
Yeah.
And ultimately, those are the things that they've grown up to be like, that's the thing that is really hard for me or whatever.
Right.
Or that's the place where I like excel. It's like we like branched off and each have our own thing that was a struggle and our thing. I mean, and I think that's just natural.
Yeah.
That's the other thing is like when I talk about my childhood, like I feel like I tend to overly focus on the hard stuff.
Absolutely.
Because that's the stuff I'm wrestling with still. And the stuff that's made life maybe a little bit more difficult for me as an adult.
It's hugely imprinting as a child.
Right.
Like the negative things because you have to survive those things.
Well, also a big part of that, I think, is that it took me years to get to a place where I felt like it was okay to look at my childhood critically.
Same.
Like, I don't know, last 5 years maybe?
Listen, same.
My whole early 20s, I was like, okay, that's not something I need to take with me. I don't want to behave or view the world that way anymore. But I would have never, ever said anything critical of my childhood. I was like, I had a fucking perfect childhood. That's what I would have said.
Same.
But that's not helpful.
I didn't
or
start
real.
looking at the negative things or the things that maybe hurt me until after my mom passed.
Wow.
It was like when she was gone, like I couldn't do it when she was still here because maybe there was like part of me that felt like it would have been a criticism of her if I were to look at things honestly. And then when she passed almost 5 years ago now, it was like all this stuff was lifted and I was able to look really objectively at my childhood and realize like, wow, like I actually have religious trauma, like in a massive way. And it's wild because like people had said that to me through my 20s. They're like, you seem like you were really traumatized from your childhood. And I'd be like, oh, no. My childhood was like quintessential, good, loving, parents loved each other, childhood, you know?
Well, because on paper, or you hear about somebody's childhood where there was like actual like physical abuse.
Right. And I'm like,
and you're like, I
was
nothing
loved.
to complain about.
Loved.
Like I had food, I had a roof, I had loving parents who were really like, honestly did a great job. Like really. But I mean, for me, what happened is I had to take a look at it to get sober. There was just like, I could not stop drinking until I like took an honest look at my childhood and like deconstructed it. And finally, I think something that really helped me, and I cannot remember the first time I heard it, was when somebody was like, because the word trauma is so loaded.
Sure.
And I was like, I don't have childhood trauma. But somewhere along the line, I heard somebody say, okay, but trauma with a little t. Not big T trauma. You were actually physically beaten or like raped or something like that. I mean, although I was like molested and definitely like for the longest time refused to think that that had like any role in my life. So for me, just hearing the like concept of little T trauma really helped me be like, okay, with that idea that maybe there were traumas I experienced that were not big and overt, but still created a lot of pain for me, especially as like a little kid.
Yeah.
I think allowed me to look at my childhood more critically. And honestly, I think it's helped me talking with my siblings because they're the same way. They like almost not refuse, but are like really resistant to the idea that there's anything in their childhood that really was harmful enough to like still impact them today. But I'm like, I feel like I feel like as their siblings, I can see it so clearly.
Yeah.
But I think honestly, I'm just like, I think that we're so sensitive to each other and more than we would love to care to admit. And I think that even if you remove some of the most defining traumas from my childhood, the next layer would still be like traumatic.
Is the thing. It's like what like the most traumatizing thing you experienced is the most traumatizing thing you experienced.
And it's still
like,
painful.
And you can't compare it and contrast it to other people's experiences because even though mine might be hellfire and brimstone sermons when I was 6 or 8 years old that I felt like I was going to die. And that wasn't physical abuse. That was like mental and emotional abuse. But that was like the worst thing for me.
Right.
So that equated trauma for me. Right. And I think us having some kind of measuring stick to like what you can't, it's just your own life. And you look at what caused you pain in your own life and that is valid.
Yes.
It's just valid.
Yes.
You know, and it all affects your adult reality, like all of it. It literally created it.
And I think that you have to go through, for me, it is essential, I think, to go through that process of looking at your childhood critically and being okay, saying, okay, 100% my parents did the best that they could and it was damn good. You can say that, I think, and then be like, and this thing really, really like hurt me in a big way. And I don't think until you can like honestly look at your childhood and accept some of those little things, like it was such a key piece for me for growth. Like I couldn't understand myself without all of it and understand why I like default to this or get triggered when something like this. Like knowing your triggers is such a superpower because then when it's happening, especially like when your partner knows, I don't know, when I get triggered around something and Ben will just be like, you're overextending yourself and it's going to create resentment.
Right.
And I'm like, God damn it, he's right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? For like your
so
partner
important
to like know it because they can see it when you're in it and just reflect it back to you in like a loving way, but also like a take care of yourself. Hey,
yeah.
like I see this. I know this is a thing for you. It's like literally the best thing. I didn't have that in any of my previous relationships, really. I mean, maybe a little bit, but not really. Especially that one very long relationship that was like 7 years. That poor guy, man.
Yeah.
I was just a disaster, like an absolute triggered mess with unresolved trauma who was loved to brag that I had no emotions and like wouldn't cry. But like that came out in anger because it was so undealt with and like just like such a shit show.
Yeah. That whole bit about for growth, like looking objectively at your childhood and being honest with yourself about what was hard and what caused you pain. You don't have to even be able to explain it or justify it or anything. Just acknowledging that hurt. I might not know why that hurt me right now, but that hurt me as a child. It's for growth. It's not for criticizing your parents.
No.
It's for being a better version of yourself so that you actually don't perpetuate pain. Because you'll just recreate that pain with the people in your life or your children or whatever.
That 100%, 110%. That's like literally everything. Because until I understood that, I like was stuck. I was stuck. Also, I do think that there's like a shift that happens because once I gave myself permission to look at my childhood and be critical of aspects of it and admit these things hurt, when I gave myself final permission, I swung to the opposite side of like anger, resentfulness, resentment, and just being like, fuck you. But I think that was important. I think I needed to swing that direction. Yeah, because I was like finally like cracked open and looking at things in a very raw way, which is like what just like therapy like forced me to do. Because obviously what I was doing wasn't working, right? And then when I did that, then it's like literally like opening a wound and like letting some fresh air and sunlight in, and it's really painful and it hurts and it shifts your perspectives and things. And then I had a chance for it to actually heal because it wasn't able to heal before that. And now I'm shifting onto the other side, which I think is like a natural progression of that process where I'm like, I just am starting to like see my parents as humans and being like, man, they're fucking awesome. Like, look at all this shit that they've gone through and what they've dealt with. And me, like, I wasn't easy. I was difficult. Like, seeing my part in things, seeing my part even in that, I need like a name for that major relationship, that defining like early 20s relationship. Starting to see like my role in that because it's not until you look at everything as a whole and honestly where you're like, that you can even also see like your part. And seeing your part is incredibly healing.
Because that's the only thing that you have any control over is your part and not either learning from that and not doing that again. And I think that takes a tremendous amount of strength and self-awareness to move from I'm a victim of my circumstances into I'm an active participant in my circumstances and these are the things I can take responsibility for.
It's interesting because I do know a lot of people get really stuck in like the victim mentality. And I don't know, I think because I've seen models of the victim mentality, it's also like was in the same category as being overly emotional, where I refused to be a victim, like to a detrimental way where I like refused to, I would be like, yeah, being molested like did not affect me. Right. But then I think getting to a place when I learned about the power of owning your part in things, I very quickly jumped on that. Because I think, I don't know, I'm a little self-deprecating. I was like, cool. Let's like talk about how shitty I am.
Oh, interesting.
And so for me, it was actually like pretty easy to grasp onto because I was like, it helped me feel a sense of ownership, reduce the feelings of victimhood. And so I very quickly was like, that seems where I want to be. But it was unexpected in how powerful it would be because it was something that, yeah, it just made you not a victim. And that feels really good. Like you're not just floating through life being attacked by people and at the mercy of whatever. And you have like a role that you can play even now, even when that stuff has happened in the past. But like going back and having difficult conversations. Like I went to dinner with that partner and was like, I am so sorry. I was like, an absolute monster at the end of our relationship, and no one deserves to be treated that way. Wow. We just sat there in this restaurant and like cried and we're like, we're sorry. And I honestly like wish I could have another conversation with him, honestly, because I know so much more about what was happening to me during that period of time. Because that's the other thing is when you look back, you have more clarity as to like what was actually going on. I felt like literally like a trapped caged animal, and I was trying to like thrash my way to like
you were
freedom,
claw your way out.
And I was like, anyway,
there is this whole idea that you touched on about how when your pain, when your trauma is subconscious, you tend to recreate it.
Oh, 100%.
Right? You recreate your pain. And I really think it's like your subconscious being like, look at this thing needs your attention. And we're going to keep recreating. Because there's like schools of thought that's, oh, the universe is punishing you and just wants you to suffer.
No, thank you.
Or there's like this part of you is trying to get your attention.
Yeah.
And then when you become aware of, say, something that how your parents raised you in a certain way and how that was like really, really hard and kind of traumatizing to you, then what can happen in that beginning phase when there's maybe like a lot of anger, you're going through some stages of grief there, when you're realizing your entire understanding of your childhood is kind of crumbling. People can pendulate and do the opposite. Like, I'm going to actually do the opposite of what my parents did for my children. You know what I mean? Like, for example, say you were raised very, very religious, and then I'm going to, for my children,
have zero
structure around that. And that can be equally as traumatizing because you're still being controlled by your pain.
Yeah.
Even though you're doing the opposite, it is still informing your behavior. And so the place to come to, like you were saying, is swinging back to this middle ground eventually, but you have to go through all those stages.
You have to go through the stages. You have to
go through the stages of grief. You have to go through it. And coming to this place of compassion and understanding what happened to you, how it affected you, what your beliefs are around it, and then feeling almost like a resolve within you to a point of hopefully some neutrality. Like you might not be able to always get full neutrality. There's going to have to be internal boundaries. And then you can parent your children or move through the world in a way that is like actually conscious. You're not perpetuating pain. You're not pendulating and doing the opposite of your pain, but you're consciously present in every given moment and making choices that are really good for you.
Honestly, that's like something I'm really excited about like having kids with Ben is because I just think that he's going to do a really good job of being like, hey,
this
is a thing from your childhood. And I think maybe you want to do it a little differently. Not like even that I would be doing the same thing from my childhood, but like maybe even doing the opposite.
Yeah.
And it really is important. I didn't realize it when I was in it because the anger that I felt so all encompassing when I was like going through the initial like healing process or whatever. But my little sister is going through that right now. And I think, one of the things I keep telling her is I'm like, it's actually really important for you to just like fully experience anger.
Yeah, you
around
can't bypass that
like I'm
stuff.
just like, you're just gonna have to go through it. But I really do think you're gonna come out on the other side closer to where I am, and I'm still working on it, where there's an insane amount of compassion for just like the people in your life doing the best they could. I mean, yeah, because when you start to do the work yourself, you start to see other people who are doing the work, but also you start to see other people and realizing like they're not doing work on themselves. And that's why they're acting the way they're acting, because they don't, and maybe they don't know, maybe they're unaware, they haven't received tools or therapy or whatever it is that they need to actually heal. And so you start to see like, okay, they really are doing the best they could. And honestly, one of the biggest realizations for me, I think I've talked about it before, but there was this point in Dolly Parton's America. I will never like forget it, because I was like, holy shit. How have I never thought of that? Where he's like, she just looked at Jad Abumrad talking about his dad because they're friends. And she was like, you don't know your dad. You'll never know him. You'll never know him like his friends will know him, like your mom will know him. You're his son. And so there's always going to be this gap in your understanding of your parents. And I was like,
yeah.
Because I feel like there's a gap in my parents' understanding of me. So why would there not be a gap in my understanding of them?
Yeah.
They will never see me as you see me. You know what I mean? Because I think a big part of it is because they think they know.
They think they know you.
They think they know. Yeah. And when you think you know something, you close yourself off to curiosity.
And you're not teachable.
And you're not, and you're not open to new observations or way of thinking. And that's so frustrating. But I do the same thing to them.
Yeah, I think with that compassion piece, though, it is important to have like a really good sense of boundaries. Because I feel like I did experience this phase in my life where I was really experimenting with like radical acceptance of people. But I did it in a way that I think was ultimately harmful to me, because I did it without any understanding of internal boundaries or boundaries with other people. Man, you're just like setting yourself up for disaster if you're going to like walk around the world with radical acceptance and no boundaries. Just like, this is like the whole like carpet, Emily.
This is you opening yourself up to actual abuse.
Yeah. And I think I did experience a lot of confusion and some really hard things because of that, because I didn't have a good sense of boundaries. So there's like steps. Yes, go through those stages of grief, be angry, be disappointed, bargain, like all those parts, they're really important to do. And then when you're working on compassion and acceptance of your parents or people in your life that maybe like wronged you, the freedom in that compassion and acceptance is tremendous. And it has to be paired with boundaries.
Yeah.
Like it has
100%.
to be paired with, yes, my parents were doing the best they could. And
Here's what I'm going to do.
I have these boundaries with them.
Because that's the thing. The thing that disappointed me the most is when I was going through the initial part of actually deconstructing my childhood and like growing, I was so awkward at setting boundaries. Like it would be like, no.
I had no concept.
Like
whatsoever.
And then they, like people in my family would be like, okay, chill. Because I was like, just like didn't know how to do it with grace. And then the thing that I came to realize is that if I didn't put boundaries in place and listen to my intuition, I think is what it was, around what boundaries to put in place, even if they made me feel a little bad or guilty or something, if I didn't put those boundaries in place, what would end up happening, and this is the thing that really bothered me, is like when I went home for the holidays or something and I was there for maybe too long and I didn't have the patience yet to navigate all of what was coming up for me during that time, then what would end up happening if I didn't set boundaries is I would end up imploding or getting angry and like saying something I regretted. And then I was acting out of alignment, or even how I used to act when I was like 17, which I think is like a phenomenon everyone kind of experiences, where you go home and suddenly you like regress. And you're like, who is this person? I don't act like this in my life. I would never say that anymore, or I would never do this thing. And here I am acting like a teenager. And so for me, what I realized was a really important thing for me was acting with my family how I am in my real life now, because that's me in alignment. And it's so much harder because of all the history to do that. I'm so much more likely to lose my temper with siblings, my mom, my dad, than anyone else in the world.
Right.
Because there's just so much history, right? It's funny because Ben will hear someone in my family say something and I'm like, oh my God, did you hear that?
Right.
And he's like, yeah, I did. And I don't understand why you're having such a reaction.
Right.
I'm like, here's what you don't see. It's like, that's referring to a time when I was 15 and blah, blah, blah. And you're like, and so for me, it was really the thing that restored my relationship with different people in my family was so much more internal work with myself and having interactions with them where I was in alignment with who I am today.
Yes.
That was it.
Yes.
And the more I can have experiences with them where I do that and like don't lose my temper, I'm patient, remember to be curious about them, especially with my parents being like, you want them to be curious about who you are. You need to be more curious about who they are. That's been the key to helping me feel better and reconnecting with my family. Because there was like definitely a period of time where I had to pull away.
Yeah.
For like healing. And I think that's important too.
That is important.
And it was very confusing for them. Anyway, yeah.
You do need to like distance yourself. If you're being like actively triggered constantly, you can't move into a state of like growth and understanding because you're in survival mode.
Yeah, you're like in fight or flight constantly.
And so having a period of time to distance yourself, to have clarity, arguably could be the thing that actually saves those relationships.
100%.
You know?
That is definitely what happened for me. I had to have some space. Like I said, my little sister's like going through that right now. She's like, I don't want to come home for the holidays. And I'm like really scared to say so. I'm like, dude, if you don't want to come home for the holidays, don't come home for the holidays.
Do the thing.
Do what you need to do. You will come out. I believe that you will come out on the other side of this.
Yeah.
Happier, healthier, more like secure in your sense of self. Higher sense of self-worth. They'll get over it. I did it. That whole period of time where I was like, I'm not coming home. And they were upset and their feelings were hurt. But ultimately, I'm like a better person because I needed to like go through that shift. I also think it's just like a big part of, I don't know why I think it's a bigger thing for teenage girls. I'm sure guys go through it too. But I just feel like I just remembered like the teenage angst, man, of just like being so, I guess it felt like sadness, but really I think it was becoming a version of yourself that wasn't quite me. And then, and like mourning it, but like subconsciously. I don't know.
Oh, interesting.
Like in my like high school years, I don't know. I just remember like sleeping all the time. My freshman year of college, I would like sleep for like 12 hours a day. And I always
think that's
wonder
like
what
developmentally like.
No, I know, but it was paired with angst.
Hormones.
Yeah, you're like hormones. No, but I've like read, I mean, it's a Joe Dispenza thing. It's like he talks about how, I remember reading this in one of Joe Dispenza's books and being like, oh, that was me. Where it's like growing up, kids are so in the present moment. And then in their like late teens, they start to realize that they need to like take on an identity. Yeah. And they need to, in order to figure out what group of people they want to be associated with, like who is their tribe, right? Because also we have a deep need to be a part of a tribe and a community that sees us and understands us. You start to reject pieces of yourself that are also actually a part of yourself in order to like fit in over here. And I really think that's what was happening. Yeah. Like that's the thing I've been telling you about where I'm like, I feel like I would be more gay. Right. If I wasn't raised in the household I was in. But I think because I'm very like pansexual, I think I kind of actually tended to gravitate towards what was more socially acceptable. Right. And I'm sure that's so many people's stories.
Least resistance. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that whole like trying on hats, identity hats, that starts like, I feel like my Evie is starting that. And I am seeing her experimenting with different attitudes and different, like sometimes she'll say things and I'll be like, where did you get that from? I'd just be like, no, I'm like genuinely curious. She would say something sassy or snarky that like it was really out of character. I'm like, whoa, Evie. Like,
is it out of character though? You know what I mean?
It was definitely like there were some things that it just was like, there are things that I seem pretty apparent that she observed and she's
trying it on.
Yeah, it's like a performance. And we like talk really transparently about that, like about it's going to be important for you to experiment with different parts of you and different and behaving in ways that make people react. Like this is all going to be very important for you to do. And she actually started off this school year, 5th grade, being part of like the popular crowd. Mm-hmm. Like there was this like popular, and literally her entire school career, she was like the person that everybody was friends with. Mm-hmm. She didn't do any exclusive anything. And then she all of a sudden had this big shift into being part of the popular crowd. And I remember talking with some of her teachers, and it was to the point where some of these kids were like being mean to other kids. And Evie was not an active like member in that, but she was like part of this whole thing that was happening. And I remember feeling nervous. I was like, oh man, like this is like surprising to me because I mean, surprising to me in the sense that this isn't how she's behaved so far, but I get that she's trying something on. And I actually had to explain to her teachers, like, she's experimenting with something right now. Like, this is her behavior. This has been her behavior in school up until 4th grade. And this is something brand new. And they were like, oh, okay. Like, this is good for us to know because she was playing such a role. And then what ended up happening is that she eventually began to realize really how superficial that group was. And she'll even say to me, she's like, I feel like my friends, they don't let me see the real them.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And they just say things and do things and it's not the real them.
What?
And I don't even know, I don't even know who they are.
What?
Yeah.
That's
this is my
nuts.
like, yeah. She's like, she's like so emotionally aware of so much. And we've talked about that. And she has since realized that that's not for her. And she's created a bunch of boundaries. Actually, I'm like so proud of this kid. There was one particular friend that was like really hurting her feelings and like gaslighting her and like doing all sorts of stuff. And to the point that Evie would wake up in the middle of the night, like crying and like coming into my room to like talk to me about it. And we talked about what kind of boundaries can you have with this person? Because you've tried talking with her and that hasn't done anything. There hasn't been any shift. So now since like communication isn't working, you need to have some boundaries. So she created boundaries where she was really just kind of distancing herself. And we talked a lot about how like it needs to be kind, not to be like, oh, I'm like mad at you and now I'm going to like ignore you. But I feel like she like created boundaries. And what ended up happening was this girl reached out to Evie and was like, Evie, I feel like I haven't treated you like a good friend. And she apologized. Aww. And she was like, I want to do better at being a good friend to you. Aww. And I was like, Evie, I was like, do you see how you had a good understanding of how you wanted to be treated in friendship? And when people weren't able to engage with you in a way that was loving to you and you created boundaries, they ended up wanting to get to that place with you. And here this girl is like,
oh my
making,
gosh,
like efforting and and they're like 10 and 11.
I know. I'm like, this isn't stuff I understood conceptually
until I was like in my 20s, like for sure, mid to late 20s. Can
you imagine being 10 years old and having like this kind of grasp on life?
It blows my mind.
And they get it. Like, that's the other thing is also, I feel like generationally, our parents, like, they were raised and then they kind of raised us thinking like kids are just like idiots.
Like vacant brains.
Yeah.
Until,
they're
like,
children. They don't
teenagers.
get it. But kids are so fucking smart.
So smart. And when you talk to them, I always talk to my daughters as if they were the most emotionally intelligent people, like always. And they have this like amazing understanding of themselves. But yeah, it just, I don't know. That was a bit of a tangent, but
no, it was such a good one.
Yeah.
It was such a like good, I guess, just example of how it can be different. Cause that was something that like I needed to know.
Yeah.
That's like one of the biggest gifts you've given me really is like watching you parent your girls has made me like want to have kids.
Yeah. Cause it can be so different. And it's been so healing
so I'm like,
for me.
wow, there's so many ways to raise kids. That's the other thing.
Many ways.
There really is. Cause that's like, I don't know why, especially because like judgy moms is like a thing. Judgy mom
culture
is so insane to me.
Yeah.
Like I've just like witnessed it among like my friends and siblings who have had babies and stuff.
Really toxic.
And I'm like, y'all are fucking mean. But it like really doesn't make sense to me because I'm like, there's so many ways to raise kids. Like, seriously.
Yeah. But if in your community, it's like a certain flavor, and you're not going along with that. I mean, I remember feeling like I couldn't even talk about my birth experience. I couldn't even talk about this shit because it wasn't exactly going along with the grain of the community I was in.
Mm-hmm. But now there's online communities where people surround themselves with only other people that think like them. And so then they're like, see, I knew I was right. And it like reinforces it. And then they just like do that with parenting. I'm like, wow, I just really hope I don't do that.
It's like, it is incredibly challenging. Like
to not be a judgy mom.
Well, no, to actually, for me, it was more to go against the grain maybe. And it's hard when you're like, this is the first time I'm doing this, but I like really feel very deeply this is the right thing for me and my children. And to not be apologetic of that. But I do feel like, and I know we've talked about this, but raising my children has healed my child self so much. Yeah. Because I've been able to show up for my kids in a way that I think I always desired to have like my parents show up for me. But also there is this flip side though, that's really interesting that I've observed in me, that there has been some times that my little child, Emily, has gotten like envious of my children.
Oh, interesting. And I feel, I could see that. Well, you hear parents do it where they're like, you should be grateful. How dare you? When I was a kid, I never had this.
Both ways and bare feet.
This is like what that is.
Yes.
It's like a quintessential parent joke that you're
so
like,
much better
you have
than I do.
so much better than me. How dare you be like upset?
Like a small example of that is...
Yeah. Sorry. I was just like, that's like, it makes sense. Really. Like it really makes sense. And it's, and I'm sure that's how my parents feel. And they're like, you spoiled brat. Thinking your childhood was like, anything other than perfect. You weren't beaten. You weren't like, you knew you were going to have dinner every night. Like,
the root of that though is this whole idea of the worst thing you've ever experienced is still the worst thing you've ever experienced. Right. And it's this idea of building bridges and growing. So like I built a generational bridge between what I experienced as a child and what my children are experiencing, which means they're going to have hopefully so much more opportunity to maybe not have to spend their entire 20s and 30s working through weird trauma. Maybe they'll have an opportunity to do other things. I mean, of course they're going to work through a certain, of course they're going to be a certain amount of fucked up. Like I can't prevent that. But I think that they're going to have an opportunity to build like so much of a farther bridge than I was able to, than I'm going to be able to go in my lifetime. You know? But this like bit of feeling your inner child be envious of your own children, like you can either clamp down on that and be like, stop complaining and you should be grateful. And you can like, and almost be like angry and defensive from that place of hurt. Or you can be really tender and be like, wow, I see that there's a part of me that didn't get to have this. And know what? It's actually really fucking beautiful that my kids get to have this, you know? And like a funny little example is that my kids, in almost every lunch that I pack them, they get fruit? Cut up fruit.
I was like,
fruit is my love language.
Let me guess.
The fruit is my love language. They get like cut up strawberries and blackberries and raspberries and blueberries. They get all this like delicious fruit. And like sometimes they'll not eat something because it has like a weird spot on it or something like that because it's like a little weird, or they just weren't feeling it. And I'm like, berries as a child for me, because they were so expensive and they weren't something that like my parents were able to afford or prioritize. Like I got to eat like bananas and apples, like that kind of stuff. But like berries, I would have eaten berries until like I was
turned into one.
Yeah.
You're a little blueberry like, from Willy Wonka.
Yeah.
Like bopping around. That's like your dream.
It's a funny example, but berries were almost this like representation of like abundance to me.
Totally.
And like having enough.
Yeah.
And like almost luxurious, you know? And then seeing my kids like throw theirs in the trash because they didn't feel like eating them for their lunch.
You're like,
was like, so I've had to be like, okay, if you don't want to eat them, at least let me eat them.
Bring them back. I will eat the berries.
Don't throw them in the trash. You bring them to me. And that's kind of like what we've negotiated. But but I have like an awareness over it because I do feel like I remember getting angry at them and being like, why aren't you guys eating this stuff? Like I'm buying you this amazing stuff for lunch. And it's like so frustrating. And then getting to a point of really understanding a major root of that frustration was that like I would have given anything to have this lunch. Yeah. As a kid. Like I would have given, like I literally would have given anything to have this lunch.
Oh my gosh, that is really funny and like super, super adorable. Oh my gosh. I always wonder because for sure my kids are going to have things that I like fuck them up with.
Guaranteed.
Guaranteed.
It just is.
It's just, I think that's a kind of a beautiful transformation that's like happening right now is because we're living in a time where everybody's so much more accepting of trauma with a little t and therapy and mental health. Like it's such a more open conversation that's not nearly as taboo as even when I was a kid.
Right.
Going to therapy was like, whoa.
Right.
You know, and now it's like, you're not in therapy? Like, what's wrong with you? I just think that a benefit of that, even that shift, is an acceptance. Like, I'm sure my parents would be very hurt and sad to think that I have any sort of trauma from childhood. You know what I mean? Whereas I think I'm going to be like, yeah, you've got some trauma.
Talk to me about it.
Tell me.
I want to apologize for all the things.
Yes, I think I'm, you know what I mean? Because I think that is a shift in like acceptance that I know I'm going to like fuck something up. I'm human. Yeah. That's the other thing is I think I'm going to raise my kids to be like, I'm human. Whereas I had the realization that my parents were human like in my 20s.
I know.
I was like, Wait, what?
You don't know like the infallible truth of the universe?
Yes. But I think I'm literally probably like from the time my kids can talk, I'm going to be like, I'm a human and I fuck up too.
Yeah.
You know?
I know. Just like it was
and
literally
like just that knowing like through your life as a kid.
Right.
Is huge.
Yeah.
Like, it's so huge.
Yeah. I like literally, it was just a few weeks ago I was driving and my girls were saying something because this has been a huge value of mine too. To show my kids that I'm a fallible human, but I make mistakes and I try to do better. That's like what I learn from my mistakes. That's what I want to teach my kids is to be teachable, right? And to persevere. But they said something like, "Oh, Mom, you know everything." Like something like
been
this.
No,
for real. That's exactly
I do
what
not
happened.
know anything.
And I told them, I was like, listen to me. And I was like, girls, I've said this to you before. I know some things. Nobody knows everything.
Yeah.
I know some tiny, very small amount of things.
Tiniest bit. And even those things are questionable and they change. And then like 10 years from now, I look back and I'm like, wow, you were an idiot.
This is so true.
Look at you, you idiot.
It's so true. But know what
That's the thing in life. The older you get, I think the more you realize how little you know.
You grow.
You just know that you're like, wow, I know so little. I feel like I saw that in my granddad. Like that was just like, there was so much I like witnessed in him that I was like, whoa, being old is crazy.
Being old, it's
being
gonna be
old
real
and
crazy.
Like somewhat like he was a very like intelligent and aware and like spiritual, emotionally intelligent man.
Wow.
I don't know. He was such a good model for that.
Huh.
That man would just like cry.
Wow.
I remember being little and seeing him cry about things. It was confusing because I didn't understand like why he would be crying. And then I just realized that he was just like feeling the world. Wow. Like he was just like feeling life.
That's why
and
I
just
don't feel like I knew this
present.
About,
Oh, really? This is why he's like my favorite human.
Well, I knew he was your favorite, but it's like to have a man that age modeling emotional vulnerability, like it's like almost unheard of.
Constantly. I mean, I remember he would be like, I mean, so many stories of like one that sticks out to me was there's this story where Chipotle was like first becoming a thing. It was like Chipotle was like the thing. Like there was like lines around like blocks to like eat Chipotle. And my granddad like sat me down and like had this conversation with me about how the tomato pickers that worked for Chipotle were being like incredibly taken advantage of and like couldn't afford to feed their families, and how it was like a company that had like no moral compass. And even though it was like cool to eat Chipotle, you like really should consider like not supporting them. And he just like being like tear filled about these like tomato workers.
Wow.
I mean, actually, no, that one is a little more serious, but like more it would be like about connection. Like he would, I don't know, he would just like have these moments of like having like a sense of pride. I don't know. He like had tears in his eyes like often. But also he was like the toughest fucking man. Like this man could do anything physical. He would build things. He would come over and just like fix everything. Like he was very masculine.
Right.
I mean, he was a physicist, very like science minded and like was always asking me about like my studies in science. I really think that's like why I was so interested in science. It was in part because I like had so much respect for him.
Yeah.
And that was his world. And that was the thing that he loved to talk about. And so I would like seek that out more. But yeah, I realized I had a point when I got to like, I think somewhere in my 20s where I was like, oh, my granddad cries because he like loves everything so much. And it's like overwhelming to him sometimes. Like he like deeply cares about like humanity.
Yeah. I think that's so beautiful. I do feel like that especially with, I think, men when they get older, because I feel like I've observed it a little bit, but there's this almost this opening into this tenderness and understanding what is actually really valuable. And it is like your family.
Oh yeah.
And like those
His
those
wife,
loved
God,
ones.
he like loved my grandma. He would like at like a dinner, he would always do a toast and was always so eloquent. And he would always be like, get teary eyed talking about how much he loved his wife. Wow. And I was just like, oh my God.
That's an amazing thing to have modeled, like to have been able to observe. I do feel like I've kind of observed that tenderness in my own father, especially after my mom died. He, I think, tapped into this, probably through his pain and grief, tapped into this like beautiful tenderness and like emotional understanding that I had never observed in him before as a child, even to the point that kind of goes along with what we were talking about, where he had acknowledged to me areas in which he was like, I see how your mom and I did not raise you guys right here. Like, and we didn't do, like, acknowledging there are things that we didn't do right and that I wish we hadn't done or I wish we had known better. And which like blew my mind, you know what I mean? Having him be like very aware of that. And then to the point where I actually talked to him a few weeks ago because I wanted to talk to him about, no, he had called me and was asking about the podcast. How's the podcast going? I know you're recording it. And I talked to him. I was like, Dad, I do want to let you know that sometimes I talk about my experience in my childhood and the hard things. And I was like, and I hope you know that when I'm talking about those things, it's because not because I'm criticizing you and mom, but because I'm trying to understand what has shaped my reality, my perception of reality, and what works for me and what doesn't. And he's like, I know, I understand. I think that is so important and so good for you. And he's like, that's not going to hurt my feelings. And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
You know, and that was like a really, I don't know, having that connection with my dad and feeling like he sees me in those ways has been really freeing for me to feel not only that I could freely talk about this with you and then publish it on the internet, but also in just feeling more confident in my own internal exploration of my childhood. And, you know, to like have the support of my parent, you know, is kind of wild.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. I don't know. It's exciting to have an opportunity to make those shifts and have like a new relationship, not just with parents, but like with siblings. That's something I like really, really want, is to keep like moving towards like a direction of like healing, like with my whole family and like our individual relationships and with each other. And I feel like I can see it happening, especially in some people. And it's like really nice. It's just, I feel like I know it will continue because that's just like the only option, really.
Yeah.
Is there another option to just be crazy and dysfunctional forever? I don't know. That doesn't sound like that's going to happen. But yeah, I don't know. It's been so much growth has happened. And that's something else that I like, maybe we can like end with, is that what has amazed me about all of this and like looking at my childhood and stuff is like growth can be exponential. My like 20s were just such a mess. There was some growth, but I would really say in the last like 5-6 years is when like an incredible amount of like growth has happened. And it's like every year I like read I look back at my journal from the beginning of the year and I'm like, whoa, like I am like on an exponential trajectory. And I think that's like really important and would have been reassuring to know. I wish somebody had told me that that was possible actually, because when you think of growth and you look at the shit you have to kind of slog through and the changes you feel like you have to make to have like a better like life, it feels like it's going to take an eternity, especially when you're like maybe in your 30s and you're like, well, it took me 30 years to get here. Surely it's going to take me another 30 to like dig myself out. And I just don't think that that's true. I think that you can change and grow so rapidly if you put the effort in.
I agree. Yeah. And I do feel like, because I see people that just are, it's like they're not even in a space to grow, like, or to consider, or to like, they're not like ready to grow, or they're not, that's not their focus. And I've observed a lot of people, I think that there's this, a belief or something that it's your external circumstances that determine your sense of self and your sense of happiness and your feelings of wholeness, and that there's so much focus. I feel like I see people focusing so much on external circumstances or external things and not the internal stuff. And it is both. Like, I think it's both, you know, both need to be addressed. But I do feel that for me and my philosophy on like what I'm doing with my life, you know, I guess it's this internal, like, I believe that when I heal, when I have clarity and understanding, compassion for myself, compassion for my story and those that were involved in my story, that healing then reflects in my external circumstances, and I move through the world. But it's like this starting inside and not from the outside in.
100%.
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's been people very close to me that I feel like that hasn't been how they've looked at it. And I think that's caused like
I will say that for me, there were some things that had to change externally for me to even be able to like do internal work. That's for me, that was like I had to stop drinking.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Like that, like, you know what I mean? Like I had to take care of myself. I think for me, it's like about taking care of your body. Because if your body is like just being assaulted by like alcohol or like eating shitty, I do think that makes it really fucking hard to do the internal work. So I think like with the exception of your body, because it's like the vessel that like holds your brain and makes you feel.
Right.
Because I mean, like when I think back up like myself when I was like drinking, my physical body, I felt anxious, but I think it was just like, I don't know, alcohol, right? Yeah. And it was like, and I used to think, oh, alcohol like calms me down, but it didn't. It definitely did not. It made me like an anxious mess. And it's really hard to get yourself to want to do internal work when your body is just like so off balance. So I will say like, for me, some physical stuff like that's such an interesting point.
It's even like getting out of an abusive relationship or like moving, like there is, it's almost like there's something that starts the thread, like pulls the thread where the thing unravels and you're able to look, and maybe that thing is pretty external because that's what's accessible, right? You know, and then it goes quickly into
internal.
Oh, this is this internal work, you know, because for me, it was my mom dying. That was an external thing.
Right.
And that was the thread that started pulling, and it went really quickly internal for me. So yeah, that's a great point that maybe it does. That's where it starts, is something really tangible.
Because sometimes I think the external stuff actually feeds like your self-worth. If you can just like get through one day without drinking and be proud of that, like fucking sometimes that's all you got the energy for. Like truly, I mean, like anyone who's ever been in like a recovery situation, that's the focus. The focus is like, just be like proud of yourself today. Yeah. And maybe proud is like too strong of a word because usually you're like in such a pit
with yourself.
You just like don't kill yourself today. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like it depends on like where you're starting. Yeah. Like truly, like how deep of a valley you're in. Yeah. And that's the thing is I think all the work, it makes the valleys and the hills like so much more mild and like so much like more mellow, rather like a rolling meadow rather than like fucking like jagged ass like Himalayas where you're like, oh my God, I like don't know if I can do another like cycle of this because I'm actually going to like fucking die. Right. And I just have been there where like the physical stuff almost is easier sometimes to also like achieve.
I guess I think what I was trying to communicate, and maybe I didn't do it very well, is just when it's almost like this belief that
you have to wait for something like to align.
Yeah. Or like that's where your sense of happiness and wholeness resides.
I feel like I totally understood that's what you meant. I think this was like a moment to like clarify. I think your point
that you're making is so good, and I'm glad you're making it. Yeah. Because there is, I mean, you can't separate yourself from your internal and external world. They're constantly influencing each other. Right.
Right.
And then it's like your pain does manifest. Like how is your pain manifested in like an alcohol addiction, you know? And like my pain manifested in like complete self-abandonment, like, you know, or like whatever, like fill in the blanks for you. And that will have external symptoms, right?
Yeah.
And to identify those. Yeah. And I think that the point you make about like your body and having your body be and your mind be in a place that it can support.
Yeah, because that's the thing. I feel like what you were trying to say or what you were saying was people think that you'll feel happy when you like achieve X, Y, and Z. But really like getting to whatever it is that you think you need, it's such a baby step process. At least that's been my experience. Like something I often tell my students actually is sometimes growing and getting better looks like cleaning out the closet. Not like, I mean, actually like metaphorically and also like physically. But seriously, sometimes it's like dealing with the pile of bills that you are like terrified to deal with, like going and like through it and just like paying them, or cleaning the room that is an absolute train wreck in your house. Because like, it's just like sometimes it's like dealing with what I call like the looming decisions, the like clouds that follow you around. Sometimes it's like getting rid of those first, and then you can like move forward with like actual like building, because those weigh you down so much. Right. And they can be so like not that big a deal. Like maybe it's just like your car's a mess and you need to go get a car wash.
Right.
But it's like maybe you have all these little things like that. And they're all like piling up.
Sabotaging
And they're
you.
just sabotaging you, making you feel like you can never like catch your breath.
Right. It's like, how can you set yourself up to be successful?
Yeah.
You know?
Maybe it's eating like a solid meal.
Eating at breakfast.
And maybe it's like eating something more than a bowl of watermelon. No, I'm just kidding. We just eat differently.
Yeah. No, I think that is such a great point. Yeah.
It depends on where you're starting. Some people are like starting from below rock bottom like I did.
Right. Right. Yeah. And it even like ties into the boundary thing that we were saying. Like if you're being constantly triggered into like fight or flight, you're never going to be able to feel like you can afford to heal. So it's like what boundaries or what decisions can be made externally to get you in a place that's more conductive to healing.
I mean, that's literally why in any form of like addiction recovery, they remove you from your environment.
Right.
That's like the point of rehab.
Yeah.
Is like you have to like be completely physically removed from your family.
Right.
In order to heal. I mean, it makes so much sense. It's just that an addiction is like a really dark manifestation of trauma, pain. And it's actually like kind of, I mean, it's why I'm so grateful for mine, because without it, I don't know, I would just kind of be like going back and forth on these roller coasters and cycles. Whereas when you like actually have something that is super traumatic and hard and dark and like painful, sometimes you get to like the dark night of the soul where you literally have no fucking choice. You have to make a change because you're like, I cannot live with myself like this. I'm like so sick of who I am as a human.
Wow.
You know? And I think that those are actually like really beautiful moments. And whenever I've had someone in my life who's like there, I'm like, this is actually a gift. I know that you hate me for saying that right now. And I deserve to be punched in the face, but I promise you this is like an actual gift.
I feel like going through like this year's been like by far the hardest year of my life. And having that in my mind of like truly believing that out of this really hard thing, that there's going to be like growth and that is going to be beautiful, has been like, sometimes that's like the only thing that's pulled me through like a night of panic attacks or whatever I was going through, is just believing that, okay, this isn't going to last forever. Time's going to keep moving forward. And there's going to be some day that I'm just clinging to this idea that there's going to be someday I'm going to look back and be so grateful for all the things that broke me this year and see how strong I've become and how I've grown as a result of it. You know? Yeah.
I feel like it's like when it's not you and you're like, when I'm witnessing you go through that, for me, it feels like all of that feels so obvious and guaranteed.
Well, having your,
like,
having
this
your
like,
perspective and you being like, so beyond
just so
certain.
Sure. I'm certain. I've never been like, more sure in my life of something. When I like see you struggling with like literally like panic attacks and stuff like that. And I'm like, it will pass and you will look back on this and this year will be some fucked up gift.
I've really clung to that. Like, cause there's been some like dark windows where you've said that to me and I'm like, I don't understand anything that's going inside me. I feel like I have no self-trust or can't believe myself at all, but I believe you. So I'm just going to believe you. And I trust that you're not lying to me and you're
Never.
not fucking with me.
No.
And I just believe you, because there's like, when your whole understanding of self like shatters.
Yes.
And you have really like no self-trust. And
Yes.
you're like having somebody in your, like, I'm just like, endlessly. I couldn't even begin to even scratch the surface on how grateful I am for you that I had somebody in my life that I could trust when I couldn't even trust myself. Like,
Yeah.
it's
I mean, you've done it for me.
yeah,
That's been like one of the biggest gifts of our friendship is that I trust you so much. And I've gone through like hard stuff where you've been like the light where I'm like, okay, I can't trust myself, but I trust you. Like, tell me it's going to be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a perspective you can only get through experiences in life where you have like a difficult experience, you come out on the other end, and then you grow that trust. Because it's one of those things that you could read people's experience about it all day long, but until you go through it yourself, it's the only way you grow that sense of knowing that those things can be gifts.
Yeah.
But you're going to need probably a few years of perspective to like really view it as a gift.
And appreciate it.
Because I remember hearing people say they were grateful for their struggles with alcohol. And I'd be like, shut the fuck up. You're so obnoxious. Like, just like really like cool it. Like, we get it. You fucking have arrived. Go do your yoga and drink your water out of my face. Yeah. Like, you know, and I was like in it. I was just like, shut the fuck up.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, I would seek out stories where people did persevere. Actually, that's literally like why I'm writing a book and why I'm doing the podcast, actually, I would say, is that hearing other people's stories of really, really dark shit and then them coming out on the other side is like, That's it. That's like, the thing that helps me the most.
Right. If that person can do it, I can do it. Yeah. Like give you that little bit. Or,
sometimes.
Right. I guess somebody that you really identify with. Right. You know, if there's somebody you really identify with and feels like really down to earth, they can do it. Their circumstances were similar. I can do it. Like, yeah, I don't know how many times I've like Googled people being happy after XYZ, you know, happens. Can you be happy? Like,
literally have Googled
blog posts of people being
This is
happy.
in my book. Literally. Reason I'm writing a book is because I used to like lay on the floor, hungover as shit, in between puking, and Google on my phone successful alcoholics. Yeah. Because I was like, I need to know that there are people who don't just like die. Yeah. And that actually like go on to like thrive after dealing with what I was like going through. Yeah. And I would just like read stories about successful alcoholics. Yeah. I mean, and actually there's a fuck ton. It was actually kind of mind blowing. Like lots of people, anyway. Yeah. That's it.
That's why we're doing it.
It really is. Yeah. I just think the more stories that are out there accessible to people is like better. That's I agree. It's about that really for me. So
seems.
Yeah. Yeah. This is where we say I love you.
I love you. And we do a singing outro.
Moonwalk out on the podcast. Bye.